Hey everyone, it's Tim with TestDemy for test automation for beginners course using Selenium and WebDriver with Python. We're back and we're going to look at functions today. Fun functions. Let's get it, baby. Come on. All right, so for today's lecture, I mentioned we're going to look at functions. So when you're talking about functions, functions are very simple. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's a function. You do something. Just for example, if I tell you to close the door, the name of that function might be close the door or close. It means to close the door. So every time I say close the door, you know exactly what to do. It's a function, a functionality. It does something, right? Um, so let's look at functions here. Like I said, functions are a great way to write less code and to reuse that same code. So you don't have to rewrite the entire long bits of code. You can just call the function. You can package all your code and put it inside a function. When you call it, right, or you say, hey, I want to use that function, you just unpackage everything all at once. It's a great way to make your code more efficient, shorter to read, and make it more run much more faster as far as performance is concerned. All right, so let's look at functions. When you're looking at functions in Python, Python uses a particular keyword uh, to designate that this is a function that is being initialized or defined. And that keyword is def. So if you looked at some Python code in the past, you might have seen this word def, and you're like, oh wow, that is so you can know now that that is an actual keyword to say, hey, you're telling Python I'm about to define a function, something I want to reuse over and over. So we can call it a function, say, the first one is going to be called no parameters. So with functions, a lot of times, you also want to set parameters. But before we get there, what you do with functions is uh, you you type in def for the function name. Now you give the function a name, just like variables had a name. Remember the rules and conventions we use with variables that you use lower cases with underscores, or perhaps you can use camel case. But the convention is if you have more than one word, you put in word one underscore word two. And we're going to look at that. Don't start off with any numbers, special characters, or anything like that. Just pretty much a lot of the same conventions you use with variables. You kind of use them with functions. So the first thing is def. Then you put in the actual function name. So we're going to call this function no parameters, because for this function, we're not going to define any parameters. Then the next thing you do an open and close. Do an open and close brackets, right? Then you always want to do the colon, right? Don't forget the colon, just like with our if statements, our for loops, our while loops. With parameters, with functions, you want to definitely make sure you put in the colon at the end. As soon as you hit enter, what you're telling Python, now Python is actually going to indent that for spaces, right? Starting from here, it's going to indent it for spaces. So if you just hit 1, 2, 3, 4, it's the same thing as if you just hit entered here. It indents it, and anything that comes in that indented block is called the block of code that Python runs for. Python is going to run it for this code. So right, this is the block, right? So we can just call this block of code, right? Block of code. Right, so all this is a block of code that Python is going to go ahead and evaluate and execute. So that's the block of code. Now when you're done with the block of code, code block complete. Right, so you're no more in the code block. So what Python would do is when you run this function here, it's going to execute whatever instructions or code you put in there. Once it's done, it's going to exit this block of code, and it's going to move on with the instructions for the rest of your programming sequence that you have outputted in your program. Okay, so let's go back here. So once you put in the, you define your function def, give it a function your name. So the name of our function is no underscore param, right? More than one word, you use the underscore. Now, you can give it variables. For example, you can give it parameters. You can say parameter 1, parameter 2, and so forth. As many, you can give it one or multiple. But for our first example, we're not going to use any parameters. So we're just going to hit enter, and it dents that code. And what we want to do here is we want to calculate the square root. All right, so we're going to say return. Okay, let's not do square root. Let's just do something simple. Let's say 2 times 2, right? Okay. Another thing you want to keep in mind when it comes to functions, functions has what's called, and let me add this to our instructions here. Function has called functions have let's see, functions, they use input and outputs, right? And it's not really applicable in this first example because when you're saying inputs, the inputs are, these are the parameters you pass, right? That's, you pass parameters into the function, and your outputs are the return keyword. So we use the return keyword, right? So if we are going to get inputs, we're going to put our inputs here, right here. We're going to put our inputs, right? Input 1, input 2, you can call it whatever, right? Those are your inputs. So those input 3, those are your inputs, and your outputs are your return. But in this case, we're not using any inputs, although functions are designed for that, but you don't have to use that every time. Sometimes you can go with what's called optional or required parameters. In this case, we decided not to use any parameters at all. But we do have a return function here. So what is this function doing? It's a function with no parameters. And this function is simply saying multiply 2 times 2, so which is the output, right? And you're gonna see it's gonna make more sense once we do a little more. So what I want to do here now, in order to utilize this function or to use it, the way you use the function in the programming world, it's something called no pun, right? You say you want to call the function call, so you're gonna call the function, call the no param function. So this is how you use it. So in order to use a function, you actually call it. Okay? So in order to use this function, I'm going to call the function. The way I call it, I'm just simply going to type in C. And as soon as you notice I typed in N and O here. If you notice, Python is smart enough to see the F. Python knows it's a function that has already been defined because of this keyword def. So when I tried to begin to use or to call it, Python, oh, you want to call that function? That guy, Python knew it. So he put in no param. And since I didn't put any keywords, any parameters that are required, it's fine. So if I print this out, if I try to execute this function, nothing is going to print off screen, and rightfully so, because what's going on in the background is actually printing. It's actually executing this code, but it's not printed to the screen. So what we want to do is we can say print. So you can go ahead and wrap the function call, your function call of no param. You can go ahead and wrap it inside the built-in function type called print. And we're going to look at that in a little bit here in a few moments. So you do that, and what is it going to do? Pretty simple. There you go. You can see it printed out 4. So what it did, it just went ahead and computated this expression 2 times 4, 2 times 2. It computated it, and we called the function, the no param function, and we had pass the print function with the no param function to the print function in order to print it out. Okay, let's look at an example now with multiple parameters, something that's required. So we're going to put in multiple parameters. That's going to be the name of this one, okay? And in this case, we're going to do, in order to, I already made the mistake. You want to make sure you put your colon. And now we have to pass some inputs. All right, so they call them argument or options, but not to be fancy, just put in, you can just name them inputs. We're going to say num1, num2, and num3, right? So what our function does here is what we want to do is we want to add all these numbers. So we're going to say num1 plus num2 plus num3, right? Just like variables. But in order to use it now, you're going to see how this works. So now when we call the mul underscore param function, so we call it here. And actually, let me go back so you guys see. I don't know if you missed that. Again, if I type in mu, see that function? But if you notice it has these functions that are required for us to put in. So if I put in mult, and notice that Python is already telling me it's on field. Parameter num1 on field, parameter num2 on field, param num3 on field. So Python is saying a required field these required fields were defined as arguments when this function was actually initialized. So you need to put in some function. So we're gonna do 3. So 3 corresponds with num1. Okay, you pass in a second value 2, and you pass in 1. So you pass in 3 values. Like if I just try to pass only 2 values in, it's gonna say, hey, you can't do it. You're missing num3, so it's expecting 3 values. So 3. So what you're gonna do is, once this function is executed, what it's gonna do is gonna return, or you can say output, the result of num1, which is 3, num2, which is 2, num1, which is 1, is going to add those two. So 3 plus 2 plus 1 is going to give us 6. So again, if I try to print this, it's not going to print nothing out, right? Because what I want to do is I want to go ahead and pass this, wrap this in our built-in print function. And if I go ahead and wrap this and go ahead and print it, and you're going to see 6, right? So that's how you use functions or define functions. Give the function a name, use the open and close parentheses, use the semicolon, hit enter, it indents it 4 spaces, then you put in your block of code. And the most important thing, do not forget to call your function. A lot of times, if you're new to programming and I used to this, you can forget to call your function and you're there cracking your mind and your brain for hours, like what's going on with my code? Your code is working. Make sure you call the function. If you call it, and if you have a return within your function definition and you don't have a print function, make sure you print that out so you can see the results of your function. The other thing I mentioned that with function you can reuse code. So when we're gonna write a function that calculates the prime number to see if a number is a prime number. So what we want to do here is we want to do define function, and we're gonna call our function prime number. Right, prime number. See how cool that is? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna say just a num, right? So we're gonna pass it a required field or option or argument. And let's go ahead and define this this piece of code. So we're gonna do a count. This is just a business logic, because the great thing about functions, you can use functions to actually put any kind of business logic you want the Python interpreter to compute for you, or any kind of business logic you want to actually have worked or computed or used within your function. So we're going to say 2, and we're going to use a while loop here. So we're going to say while counts. So remember, a prime number is a number that can only be divided by itself in 1. So so we're gonna say while counts. Let's see here. We're gonna say minus num. While counts. Let's say count is greater than num minus 1. Okay, and we're gonna say if let's see here, we're gonna say if counts is equal to 0. If count is equal to 0, no, I don't want to do that just yet. Actually, I want to do let's calculate the num num modulus 2, so let's divide it by 2. Actually, we can divide it by count. Num modulus 2. And we're saying if that's the case, return false. Let's see here. Return false. Then let's do a counter. Then we want to do count. We're going to do count plus 1, so we can increment that. And let's go ahead and return true if not. All right, let's see. And now let's go ahead and call this function. So basically what this code logic does here, it actually computes a prime number. So let's go ahead and call this function here. We're going to say prime number. Oops. We're going to say prime number, and we have to pass a value. So let's use 7. Let's see if 7 is a prime number, which I believe it is. So it should return true on this one. Actually, yeah, see, remember I told you, we got to print this out. So you'd be like, oh, it's not working, but it's working. You forgot to print. It's working, but you want to actually print that to the screen. All right, so you can see that. So when we try to compute that, we pass the value 7 for this required parameter we defined here. So 7. So let's see 9. 9 should be false. I don't think 9 is oh, actually, okay, yeah, well, 9 is. Let's see if our thing is working right. Let's try something that's not. So it should return false. We know 10 is not. 10 is not a prime number. So it's returning true. So there's some kind of there's an error in our code logic here. Let's see here. Well, count equals 2. Well, count greater than 2, so that's 2. So I'm just thinking a lot. I'm just trying to go through my. So if I say count is 2, 2. Oh, actually, this should be less than. That's our problem right there. Okay. So it should be less than. That should work now. Now this should be false. There we go. So that was the logic in my code here. It was actually supposed to be less than when you actually compute that. So let's just kind of walk through this real quick. So we passed the value 10 to here. So we start off, and the way the code runs, as Python is going down here, it's going to come to this uh, prime number function, and it's going to skip all the way down here because there's nothing to do. And it's going to see, oh, you called it, right? It's going to see that this was called, right? And it's going to see past the value 10. So what it's going to do here is, let's go ahead and write this out. So let's go ahead and put this in some strings, excuse me, some comments. So the first time around, it's going to say count. It's going to say num based on what we passed. It's going to say num is the value 10, and it's going to say count is the value 2, right? So if you look at our first block of code here, let's go ahead and break this down here. If we put in our first block of code here, we're going to say while, right, count is 2 and num is 10, right? So let's just break this down. So if you look at this, while 2 is less than 10, actually, forget that. Let's do the order of operations, right? Order of precedence. 10 minus 1 is 9. So 2 is less than 9. Is that true or false? 2 or less than 9 is true because 2 is less than 9, which is 10 minus 1. Remember, 10 is the num and 2 is the count. So if that's true, what it's going to do is going to enter this block of code, right? It's going to enter that block of code, and it's going to say if and num here is 10, right? And count is modulus count is 2. So here's what's happening. So he's saying if 10 modulus 2 equals 0, return false, and that's why you got false here. So when we do 10 modulus 2, which means how many times can you divide 2 into 10 without and see if there's any kind of a remainder, and whatever that remainder is, that's the modulus. But in this case, when you divide 10 by 2 or 2 by 10, how many times can 2 be divided in 10? It can be done 5 times, right? Which is your quotient. But as far as your modulus value, the remainder is 0. So it says equals 0, so it's going to print false. And it's kind of the same logic for the prime number. When you actually pass a prime number, it actually kind of goes through the same logic. But just wanted to kind of walk through that. And I wanted to show you guys one more thing before we wrap up this video. And what that thing I want to show you guys, it's called docstrings. And with docstrings, it's just a way to put some kind of comments and documentation in your code, just in case you or somebody else has to actually come back and reuse that code. Because the great thing about a great test automation engineer or a great developer as a whole, that they have very good documentation. So if I do this, the parentheses, double quotes, double quote, parentheses, double quotes, sorry, hit it 3 times, you see he's going to start this docstring, right? And for the docstring, all he wants me to do here is saying, I'm gonna define that that this docstring calculates the prime number, calculates the prime number. Okay. And what's your param number? It's an integer. What are we looking to return? True or false, right? That's what we're looking to return. True or false. That's what we're returning here. As you can see here, false and true. All right. So you can do the same docstring for here. If I hit double quotes 3 times, you can see here, this is going to calculate 3 integers multiplied by themselves. 3 integers, and this is just a good way to document your code. It's called docstrings. It calculates 3 integers multiplied by themselves. Okay, multiplied. All right, so the first number is an integer, because sometimes you might have a combination of strings and other data types. Integer, they're all integers, right? And it's going to return the value of all 3. And again, like I said, this is just in case somebody else is going to read your code or you come back, they can know exactly what your code is doing. All right. So those are doc strings, and you want to make sure you have doc strings. And again, you guys' homework is go ahead and put some doc strings for this one in my code. Pause the videos, put some doc string, create your own functions, and put some doc strings. I want you to go ahead and put some doc strings in this one. Pause the video and go ahead and work on that. Put some doc strings in that one, whatever you can come up with, if it applies or not. The last thing I want to mention here is Python has what you guys have seen, which are a lot of built-in functionalities. Again, functionality that you can see is code that's already been, the business logic has already been put into the function. All you have to do is call it. For example, a perfect example is print, print hi, right? So the print in itself, this actually is a built-in function, right? So if you notice here again, if I try to type in print, see it's a function that designates the built-in function. That is, see, it says built-in. So go to Python's website. You can maybe Google built-in functions Python. You're going to see a whole bunch. There's also the len built-in function, which you probably looked at in previous videos, I believe so. So let's say I say I equals, I'll initialize this to hello, right? And if I want to see what the value is, and the len function, it counts how many values that is, and how many characters are in there. And you know for the print function, it's going to print out hi. So let's go ahead and run this. See it here? This is the print function. It print out hi. It's the built-in function. The built-in function from the len, it just when it counted how many characters. 1, H, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? There's also the input function that you guys saw earlier. If you notice it, input function. You guys noticed, remember looking at that earlier. So with the input function, it's kind of the same thing. You can say it takes in input from the user on the screen. You can say, what is your name? So these are just a variety of input functions. And you can say print. And it's going to ask, what is your name at the bottom of that. See, what is your name? Then you say Tim. And that's it. And it just prints it back and returns Tim, right? So that's pretty much it for functions. What I want you to do is practice using functions. I can't stress that enough, because a lot of times, as you saw, it's easy to forget the semicolons. Get good at writing the right naming conventions for your function names. Build some business logic, build some programs, use doc strings, document your code, be great, and I'll see you, as always, in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out testdemy.com for free course material, and I'll see you soon. All right, peace, one love, out.